Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akari-Duluale, the headlines. NATO says Poland blast is likely caused by Ukrainian missile, but Moscow bears responsibility. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says attacks in Ukraine during G20 summit shows Mr. Putin's contempt for international rules. And Germany offers to help Poland to patrol its airspace after the missile incident. NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says the blast in Poland was likely caused by a Ukrainian air defense missile, but that Russia was ultimately responsible because it started the war. Mr. Stoltenberg says news that it was likely not fired by Russia helped ease the pressure, but did not clear Moscow of blame.
Based on what we so far know, this is most likely Ukrainian air defense systems or missiles. But again, this is not Ukraine's fault. Russia bears the responsibility for what happened in Poland yesterday, because this is a direct result of the ongoing war and the wave of attacks from Russia against Ukraine yesterday. And investigation into this incident is ongoing, and we need to await its outcome. But we have no indication that this was the result of a deliberate attack. And we have no indication that Russia is preparing offensive military actions against NATO. That missile doesn't have the characteristics of an attack. And therefore, that explains also why the actions were as they were, and that doesn't say anything about our ability to defend against deliberate attacks against NATO territory.
And we can now tell you that Poland itself says a missile that crashed inside the country was probably a stray fired by Ukraine's air defenses and not a Russian strike, is in international affairs that war could spill across the border. NATO ambassadors held emergency talks to respond to Tuesday's blast that killed 2 people at a grain facility in Poland near the Ukrainian border, the war's first deadly extension into the territory of the Western Alliance.
Without any doubt, the responsibility for this event is on the Russian side. And we have to be absolutely clear. But at the same time, we have to continue the discussion, consultations with our partners, especially among our NATO allies, how to increase the airspace monitoring, how to take other measures to make sure that such events won't happen in the future. We know that by shelling, particularly western flank of Ukraine, only a couple of dozens miles from the Polish border, Russian Federation, Russia must know and must realize how threatening it is, and about this possibility that one of the missiles or anti-missiles might eventually land on the soil of a foreign country, in this case Poland. So it doesn't change the dynamics. Poland stands by Ukraine, and we jointly condemn Russian shelling, tragic shelling, and Russian Federation is the only state, the only country to be blamed for what happened.
However, for British Foreign Minister James Cleverly, the full details of the circumstances of the explosion are not yet unknown. He adds that Britain will not rush to judgment and that its response will always be led by the facts.
Campaign is Putin's revenge. I think it is wise to advise the House that at this point, the full details of the incident are not complete, but earlier today, Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, said there was, and I quote, no indication that this was the result of a deliberate attack. He added that the incident was, and I quote again, likely caused by a Ukrainian air defense missile fired to defend Ukrainian territory against Russian cruise missile attacks. Poland will lead the investigation to establish exactly what has happened, and the UK stands ready to provide any practical or technical assistance. In the meantime, we are not going to rush to judgment. Our response will always be led by the facts. But the House should be in no doubt that the only reason why missiles are flying through European skies and exploding in European villages is because of Russia's barbaric invasion of Ukraine.
Now let's hear from Ukraine itself, where the President Volodymyr Zelensky says that information has been made accessible for an investigation on the case of the missile that crashed inside Poland. Mr. Zelensky says the Ukrainian position is very transparent, stressing that it strives to establish all the details and every fact.
Surely, one of the main questions at the Security Council meeting is the situation in Poland. The clarification of all the circumstances of how Russian aggression crossed the Polish border. The Ukrainian position is very transparent. We strive to establish all the details, every fact. That is why we need our specialists to join operations of the international investigation and to get access to all the data available to our partners and to the site of the explosion. All our information is in full access. We have been giving it to our partners since the night, since those first hours when the world began to investigate what had happened.
And the United States and its allies have criticized Russia at the United Nations Security Council over missile attacks in Ukraine in a meeting a day after the missile that NATO said was a stray one fired by Ukraine's air defenses crashed inside Poland. The British and Polish ambassadors to the UN echoed the statement that Russia's invasion was ultimately to blame for the explosion in Poland. Members of the Security Council at the meeting also called for Russia to extend the Black Sea grain deal, which is set to roll over on Saturday unless there are objections.
On November 15th,
And Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says the attacks in Ukraine during the G20 summit in Indonesia this week shows Russian President Vladimir Putin's contempt towards international rules. Mr. Sanchez was also asked about the missile that hit Poland and said caution needed to be exercised as to who fired it until the results of an investigation into the attack were made public. The Spanish Prime Minister also entirely blamed Russia for the crisis on the food and energy markets in a news conference following the closure of the summit. And NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has confirmed one of the alliance's top priorities now is to provide more air defense systems to Kiev after Russia launched its biggest wave of missile attacks on Ukrainian cities in more than a month on Tuesday. Mr. Stoltenberg added that he had spoken with Polish President Andrzej Duda and US President Joe Biden after a missile had landed in eastern Poland and killed 2 people near the border with Ukraine. The explosion marked the first time a NATO country has been directly hit during Russia's invasion of Ukraine, with global leaders working to allay fears of a potential escalation in the conflict as a result of the strike. Meanwhile, Germany says it will offer support to Poland to help patrol Polish airspace in light of the missile explosion. Speaking at a press conference, German Defense Ministry spokesperson Christian Thiels said, quote, "As an immediate reaction to the incident in Poland, we will offer to strengthen air policing with combat air patrols over Polish airspace with German Eurofighters." The deputy spokesman for the German government, Wolfgang Birchner, said at the same news conference that Chancellor Olaf Scholz had spoken to Polish President Andrzej Duda on the phone and offered Berlin's support. Let's talk now to Dr. Tony Agbon's researcher, senior lecturer, Anglia Ruskin University in London. He joins us, as always, virtually. Good morning to you, Doc.
Yeah, good morning, Laddie.
Excuse me. Nice to have you with us. Perhaps we should begin with this strike. Do you believe it was a stray?
I want to, my gut feeling wants to believe that. knowing fully well the consequences, I don't think Russia will be that daft to, attack one of the NATO countries, knowing fully well the consequences of Article 5, where NATO will always say that an attack on one of the member of the alliance is an attack on the other, and there will be repercussions, very strong repercussions. So I want to believe that it was probably a deflection of the missile that was thrown. So that is my belief at this moment.
But the reactions have been quite varied, with everyone ultimately blaming Russia, even though at the very beginning, in the hours after the attack, after that crashed missile, so many people thought that it was Russia's stray missile that was meant for Ukraine that went into Poland. And already there were fears that this would draw in NATO fully. And some of the theories already indicated that this would be to Ukraine's full advantage if NATO was drawn into the conflict directly by an intended or unintended attack on Poland.
Yeah, I think the whole attack on this small village in Poland, Shevardov, is still under investigation. But, looking at the humane side of this whole issue, I just want to believe that it wasn't a direct Russian attack. But that is not to absolve Russia anyway, because if they have not gone on this senseless invasion of Ukraine, we won't be talking about all these attacks. And two people lost their lives in Poland yesterday. So for now, I just want to stand on the side of caution and believe that this was not a direct Russian attack. Because if it is found to be, we all know the consequences. This could actually escalate this crisis. The NATO alliance will get involved, like they did after the 9/11 terrorist attack on the US. And some people are already saying, could this be the start of the Third World War? And that is a scenario that nobody wants to actually be thinking about, or that nobody wants to see. The consequences will be there for the entire world.
Now, the other side of all of this, of course, is that there is still the potential that this could escalate through another method, because in the aftermath of this attack, for example, Germany is offering to help patrol Polish airspace. Now, if anything were to happen and there was an incident involving Germany and Poland, again, we could still have this same situation, or indeed any of the other countries that are involved. Quickly, President Joe Biden made the statement that seemed to start the bringing down of pressure when he said, look, all the information that he has does not indicate that this is from Russia, even though, all the facts had not been established then. But if, as you said, something else, draws in NATO into this conflict, we are back to square one, aren't we?
Yes, we will definitely be back to square one, Ladi. And I was really, excited with this, swift response of, the elderly president of the United States, Joe Biden. He quickly summoned a meeting of the G7 and NATO officials during the G20 meeting. And I'm sure they looked at it, they looked at the whole issue, because and I think the Russians also were very quick to deny, because they also know that this crisis, if it escalates beyond where it is now, that little window for negotiation that a lot of us are expecting that may likely come in the spirit of Christmas and the New Year, will be quenched. So, and the Polish president himself had also tried to, diffuse pressure by saying that it is very unlikely that this was from Russia. Russia knows the consequence of, attacking a NATO member. I don't believe that Russia will go to that extent. Because if you look at the war anyway, at the moment, Russia is not winning it. They are just attacking civilian targets. 85 missiles were thrown into Ukraine yesterday. Militarily, I think Russia know that the game is as good as up.
But given that there are other players in this situation that have airily remained silent, one would have expected that some of the other people who know the consequences of what was being discussed and what could happen if the discussions went another way other than President Joe Biden. And I'm happy that you mentioned the fact that the elderly U.S. president, in this instance, his age and his experience in international affairs came to bear almost immediately, because a lot of the other leaders who were sitting with him were much younger, had not experienced this kind of situation before, and therefore their own reactions may have been different except for what he said. But is there a situation where you see that it is possible now? Because you talked about negotiations. The grain deal is up on Saturday for renewal. Russia has indicated in no way that it is prepared to renew it. The Ukrainians are busy fighting off missiles, and NATO now is more fully engaged on the military side, it would appear. So where does that leave the grain deal?
Yeah, I think for the grain deal, which was brokered earlier, I believe it will be renewed. And it will be renewed basically for economic reasons, because Russia too is reeling under the sanctions that the West and NATO allies have, put on it. So I think this grain deal will be renewed, but Russia is just, playing hard to catch. They're trying to see if they can, come into this renewal deal, from a stronger point. So it will definitely be renewed. And another thing that I want to also point out is when you look at the this military invasion, the way it's been going for Russia in the last 2 weeks, exactly, you will know that there's been a lot of retreat from the Russian side, and information available also shows that there is some growing dissent more than ever before within the Russian political elite, the population. People are getting weary of this whole military invasion that many thought was going to be done within was going to be done with fear within 2 to 3 weeks. So there's a lot of pressure also on President Putin from the home front. And from what we are hearing, some top generals in the Russian army, they are beginning to get really uncomfortable with the path that this crisis is taking, because it's becoming a national disgrace. That Russia, has been on this trajectory since February. Next week, this is going to be 9 months.
Next week, it will be 9 months. But let me bring you to some of the fallout of this crisis, and perhaps maybe even before this crisis, and that is to come to where you are in Britain. And I know the last time I spoke to you, we both discussed the possibility of nurses going on strike. At that time, they had indicated their intention to join the railways and bus drivers at the same time that Rishi Sunak was just trying to settle down into the prime ministerial seat and try to see what he could do economically to help households in that country. How is all that playing out? Is the help finally reaching the households? I remember when I spoke to you last, we were expecting that each household was due something like £500 to arrive or so. Yeah, has that? Do you have any information about how that is proceeding?
Yeah, thank you, Ladi, for that. A lot of households, including myself speaking to you, we're receiving, some support from the government with respect to energy costs. The other day, I was checking my meter and I saw, about 60-something pounds. And I had to ask, did anybody make any purchase? And my wife was like, no, I didn't. So I knew right away. So that is already happening. I also speak to colleagues at work and friends and families around here. So that is happening already. And like you pointed out, this whole energy crisis this is a major fallout from the Ukraine Russian crisis we talked about, some minutes ago. So people are getting the support, but there's still that feeling that the £450 support is not far-reaching enough. So, but we are all watching, and we are hoping that we'll get more support as the days go by, more so when the winter season is going to really kick in beginning from next week. It's getting really cold here now. It's going to get colder as we go into December.
How about the issue of the strikes, the nurses, the rail workers, and so on?
Yes, the strike, the nurses, they've done their ballot. The biggest union, the Royal College of Nursing, they've balloted, and their members have opted for strike. Government is negotiating with them, but there is a real issue there. The nurses are looking at about 17% increase, and the government is not willing to go beyond 5%. The gap on the negotiating table is just so much. So we are really hoping that the strike doesn't go ahead. Traditionally, during this winter season, the health system here at the NHS is always under pressure. So if this strike was to go ahead, the first of its kind in 106 years, is going to cause a lot of damage to the already fragile health system we have here, especially during this winter season. So we hope it will not go on. For the rail workers, a strike was cancelled last week because the government called them to the negotiating table, and that at the moment is going well. So we are hoping that some of these strikes, they don't take place. But fast for citizens, everyone here is reeling under the yoke of inflation. Yesterday, the Office of National Statistics released data for the month of October, and we found that the inflation rate increased from 10.1% in September to 11.1% in October. And there is projection that inflation will still go up. So really difficult times here at the moment.
Indeed, it looks quite difficult. But one can only hope for the best, as you said, and that some of these things do not come to the end of the line before people saner heads prevail. Thank you so much, Dr. Agbons, for your time and for your interesting information and perspective this morning.
Thank you, Ladi. Have a great day.
You too. Top U.S. General Mark Milley says the U.S. is determined to support Ukraine, quote, for as long as it takes. The U.S. Army General was speaking from the Pentagon and emphasized that Ukraine's chances of any near-term outright military victory are not high, cautioning that Russia still has significant combat power inside Ukraine, despite suffering battlefield setbacks since its invasion in February. Ukraine has vowed to keep the pressure on Russian forces until it reclaims control of all occupied territory. Over the weekend, Ukrainian forces recaptured the strategic southern city of Kherson, stoking optimism about Kiev's broader military prospects heading into the winter. Still, General Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, urges caution. He and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin addressed reporters after a virtual meeting between dozens of defense ministers supporting Ukraine's military with billions of dollars in military hardware, as well as training, advice, and intelligence.
The United States are determined to continue to support Ukraine with the means to defend themselves for as long as it takes. But at the end of the day, Ukraine will remain a free and independent country with its territory intact. Russia could end this war today. Russia could put an end to it right now, but they won't. They're going to continue that fight. They're going to continue that fight into the winter as best we can tell. And we, the United States, under the direction of the President and the Secretary of Defense, we will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes to keep them free, sovereign, independent, with their territory intact. The President of the United States has been very, very clear to us that it's up to Ukraine to decide how and when or if they negotiate with the Russians. And we will continue to support them as long as it takes.
First of all,
The investigation is still ongoing, and Poland is conducting that investigation. We are assisting in any way we can. We do have some experts on the ground there helping Polish leadership. We have full confidence in Poland's ability to conduct this investigation in a proper way. And until that's complete, again, I think it'd be premature for anybody to jump to conclusions. And I know that Ukraine has offered to participate and help in any way they can as well. So we won't get ahead of the investigation, but our information supports what President Duda said earlier in his preliminary assessment, was that this was most likely a result of Ukrainian air defense missile. But we'll let the investigation play out here.
Israel has accused Iran of launching a drone attack on an oil tanker off the coast of Oman, with one official describing it as, quote, an Iranian provocation in the Gulf linked to the World Cup in Qatar. A self-destructing drone attacked the Pacific Zircon, a Liberian-flagged Israeli-affiliated tanker carrying gas oil, at around 10 on Monday, but did not cause major damage, according to a U.S. military official. The drone did not disable the ship or interrupt its journey, according to the same official. But an Israeli official said the weapon was an Iranian Hesser Said 136 self-destructing drone, the same ones being used in Ukraine. Iran has sent its self-destructing drones to Russia for use in the war in Ukraine, underscoring the extent to which Iran has developed its attack drone technology. U.S. Central Command later said in a statement that exploitation of the debris that hit the vessel reveals that it was indeed a Said series one-way attack drone. And a senior U.S. official says, a rather Russian official this time, says Russia's delegation won't attend the fall session of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which is set to take place next week in Warsaw, because Poland has rejected the delegation's members' visas. Admission of the Russian delegation to the OSCE session would violate the principles of solidarity with Ukraine. That's according to the head of Poland's delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly, Barbara Bartusz, who was speaking in a response to the request for visas. Vladimir Zaborov, first deputy chair of the Russian Federation Council Committee on International Affairs, had said, quote, unfortunately, we received an outrageous response from the head of the Polish delegation to the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, Ms. Bartusz, who literally said that she does not see any possibility of Russian and Belarusian representatives participating in the autumn session of the OSCE EPA in Warsaw. We expect that a similar problem with restricting the access of the members of our delegation to the Assembly's events may be repeated in February, when the winter session is planned in Vienna, and also next July with regards to the annual session in Canada. Let's talk now to Laddie Williams of our business desk, joins me right here on set. Morning, Laddie.
Good morning.
The situation here is Russia is in recession.
Yeah.
After a second straight quarter of GDP contraction. Yeah. Would we say that's surprising?
No, it's not surprising at all. It's a country at war, and with all the massive sanctions that have been, heaped on Russia after it invaded Ukraine, it is expected that the economy will definitely feel the impact of this, and we've seen that, happen from time to time. Second, the rule, 2 contractions equals a recession. Right. And that's what we're seeing now. The GDP shrunk by about 4% in the third quarter from about July to September. And this contraction was largely driven by a 22.6% plunge in wholesale trade and another 9.1% drop in retail trade, which is expected. And, companies have suffered a big loss, in sales, with about 5,800 companies, in Russia, having to go through this. And obviously, we know the sanctions are biting, even though Russia's been enjoying that big oil money, and gas, with the rising prices. Even though they've been enjoying that, they've had to rely solely, on that, which is obviously not good for the economy. Even though, they've been able to, beat expectations, by some economists. Some economists expected, that the economy would be in a worse position
than it is
right now. But it's managed to survive due to high energy prices. But at the end of the day, other sectors are being impacted by this. They're not able to get the manufacturing industry. They're not able to get the components, they need, with the sanctions on their imports and exports. So that is, driving down their outputs at this time as a country. The impact of the sanctions on their exports also, impacting their other exports. Even though we had the grain deal, they're still able to send out, some things there, but some other critical exports have been impacted by this, and obviously the sanctions on, most of the oligarchs, in Russia. So all of this, it's a big ball, hitting the Russian economy, and it is expected that they would actually struggle, at this time.
Now, prices of wheat are falling in spite of the seeming controversy over whether or not this grain deal you referred to earlier will be renewed.
Yeah.
How is that being squared out?
So at the end of the day, we know, the grain market is sensitive to what happens, with all the geopolitics and all of that. But, at the end of the day, we're seeing signs that this deal, might actually be renewed. We've seen, Ukraine actually send out a statement, earlier today saying that the deal, the Black Sea deal will actually, be renewed. So all of this, the traders out there are following,
very closely.
They're quite closely, bullish. Exactly. So seeing that, there won't be supply concerns with a renewal, we've seen prices actually drop. Obviously that would impact, price, but we're still seeing some level of volatility, in that market, because at the end of the day, we know anything can happen. With Russia at this point, because just a little escalation now could turn everything
around, and we won't be talking about what we're talking about now.
So they're still optimistic, about food supply, from that deal at this time. Now, so that's why we're seeing prices down.
This war in Ukraine, it doesn't look as if Russia is going to be the only country with the R word, because the IMF is saying that that war is the single most important negative factor for the global economy. Many countries have tried to tame inflation by raising rates.
Yes.
But then, as you have repeatedly said on this program, the consequence of that is the possibility of a recession.
Yeah.
So possibly Russia is not going to be the only one.
No, they're not going to be the only one. We're seeing, contraction in, major economies, right now, and we're seeing inflation continue to rise. Even though there's a little hope, with the U.S., we're seeing some level of peaking, but it's not confirmed yet. We still have, other data to look at. But at the end of the day, we're seeing other countries still suffer, high inflation, and that is, obviously jacking up interest rates is, on the cards for that. But we've seen, how the war has impacted, food security. We've seen the, volatility in the food market. And most of the inflation is driven by rising food prices, at the end of the day. And now, with energy prices still skyrocketing, still high, and, there's still signs that it will stay elevated, as the war, carries on. So the IMF is practically looking at all of this and saying, you know what, anything, like the last news we got, about that Poland missile attack. We saw how the markets reacted to that.
Almost immediately.
It is a huge risk, for the global economy. So we've seen the IMF actually project that the forecast for 2023, the growth forecast is about 2.7%, lower than, the expectations we had, before the war. So it's all indications show that this is the biggest risk right now.
At this point, indeed. Thanks, Ladi. Of course, Ladi will have the reaction of the markets to all this news, plus the news elsewhere, Frankfurt, London, and Asia as well, as well as, of course, the Nigerian boss as well will be on Business Morning and Business Incorporated. So thank you, Ladi.
Thank you.
Let me, before we take a break, let me read this piece of news not too long coming in. Republicans have secured the 218 seats needed for a majority in the lower chamber of Congress a week after the midterm elections while the party's margin in the House of Representatives is razor thin, it is enough to stall President Joe Biden's agenda for the next 2 years. Kevin McCarthy, the Republicans' leader in the House, has been celebrating the result, but Democrats will retain control of the upper chamber, the Senate. The new Congress will convene in January. Republicans, who had hoped to win back control of both chambers, underperformed expectations in last week's midterms. But they won the seats they needed for their House majority yesterday when California's 27th district went to the incumbent Mike Garcia. The Republican Party is now projected to win between 218 and 223 seats in the 435-seat House. What the consequences of this will be, we'll have to see in the days ahead. Let's see if we can now speak to Dr. Thomas, Professor of International Relations at LASU and a founding member of the Association of Foreign Relations Professionals of Nigeria. Prof, can you hear me? We seem to have had a problem with your audio a bit earlier.
Yeah, I can hear you clearly now, Aladi.
Good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good morning.
Let me start from the story we took before the break, which was that the House of Reps in the United States has gone to the Republicans. They now have enough seats to make a majority. And before now, of course, they had indicated that their own reaction or their own way of dealing with the Ukraine situation would be slightly different from the Democrats, who had controlled both houses up until now. How do you see this playing out now that they actually have it, even though the Democrats have retained control of the Senate?
Now, I believe that the foreign policy of the United States is institutionalized. It is institutionalized in a way that Russia is seen traditionally and fundamentally as an adversary. So whichever party, whether it is Democrats, whether it is a Republican that is in power, would not deviate from this particular line or this principle. I'm not too sure if it were to be Putin, if it were to be Trump that was in power. However, if Biden, for as long as Biden is still the president, like they have said, the only thing it will take now is that it will take them more rigorous process of negotiating or reaching some kind of truce or agreement or collaboration. So there is no way there will be a kind of dramatic departure from the institutionalized process of seeing Russia as an adversary and treating Russia as such. That's one. Secondly, this war, like I've stated sometime, is like a proxy war. Theoretically, proxy war in the sense that Ukraine is seen as a democratic nation, or is fighting this war as for democracy. Because the moment Ukraine loses this war, it's going to be a threat to other democratic nations. And that is what Ukraine has been talking about. And that is why the U.S. Defense Secretary, the U.S. President, everybody has been saying that for as long as the United States exists, there is no way that Russia will win this war. Two fronts. One, the Cold War is still on psychologically. And that is the fact. The fact is that in any scenario, in any situation where U.S. supports a particular country, the U.S., international relations and international politics is also about prestige. So the U.S. will not want to lose this war, because the moment Ukraine loses this war, then indirectly the United States has lost to Russia, and like they will say, God forbid, they don't want to see a situation where they will lose to the Russians. And then secondly, as far back as 1973 during the Yom Kippur War, it has been stated, not necessarily written as a kind of rule, but it has been believed, or it has been decided that in any situation where Russian weapons and the United States weapons collide or are in conflict, the United States will always make sure that the United States weapons come out, triumph over the Russian weapons. So it's also about marketing the weapons. It's also about marketing weapons, because now everybody is looking, the entire world is watching. And those who are interested in buying arms, this is the time that they have the opportunity to see which arms or which ammunitions or which armaments are superior. And obviously for Ukraine, with the kind of limited number of soldiers they have, you can see that it is the weapons, it is the US weapons and the European weapons that are giving them that edge. So in this kind of scenario, I don't see the Republican saying that they are not going to support Ukraine. It's going to be very tough. It's going to be very difficult. Don't forget the Democrats are also still controlling the Senate. So it's going to be tough. It will only stimulate some kind of negotiation and a kind of diplomatic adjustment here and there. It may not be automatic as it used to when the Democrats were controlling. However, it will still be U.S. supporting. It will be. The U.S. will still support Ukraine. That's as far as those two parameters of not wanting Russia to prevail or to win any war where they are involved, and then the marketing of their military armaments.
Let's look at what happened on Tuesday. We had talked about it before, the possibility of escalation of this crisis through some incident that nobody predicted. And on Tuesday, something like that happened. 2 missiles dropped into Poland, and 2 people were killed. But we have since learned that, from all the information, it may not have been what was initially thought, which was that it was a Russian attack that went astray. Because if it was a Russian attack that went astray, many people started talking about Article 5 of the NATO Convention. And there was a huge struggle to separate Article 5 from Article 4. Article 4 being the one that brought about discussions and so on, but Article 5 being the one that means if you attack one of us, you have attacked all of us. And that's the one that worried so many people. Because if NATO got fully involved in the crisis, then, of course, we are looking at something completely different. NATO has 27 members, and 27 of them would have to come to Poland's defense if it was proved that Russia was the one that, sent in those missiles. But I want to ask you about this possibility of escalation. Always there, but is it more real now than it was, say, 1 month ago?
Well, for as long as this war continues, there is that possibility, very high possibility of escalation. And how? The moment you are sending on more than 100 missiles into a particular country, there is no way there will be, no matter what you call precision missiles, sometimes you have accidents. And then initially when they started, and to a very large extent, they have left Lviv because they know the proximity between Lviv and Poland. So they know the shared border. Lviv has always, for a very long period, I think this will be the second attack on Lviv. This will be the second attack. And that means they have been very careful. But for how long do you want to be very careful? You are not at the battlefront. Your pilots, your fighter jets, your everything, they are there. And sometimes they miss the targets. They miss the targets. Now, there is a contradiction in the NATO statement. When you say that, well, it was not a direct attack or it was an accident. Now, are you saying that because 2 people died now, so if another accident happens, whether as a result of interception, whether as a result of a missile missing the way, what do you do? So from now, I believe that a particular position should be taken against Russia's onslaught or maybe a warning sent to Russia. In that way, that is the only way that we can talk of restraint. That's the only way we can talk of a kind of caution. But when you say that this is an accident, and then it happens again, because in a war, accidents will continue to happen for as long as nobody, even the manufacturers of the precision missiles, cannot guarantee that there will be no collateral damage. So, for instance, if the collateral damage keeps happening in Polish environment and everything, or possibly Finland and Sweden, they are now members of NATO, of EU and NATO. And at the end of the day, all these accidents will culminate into what you call aggression. Because Russia, for instance, will definitely know that there will be interceptions, and then they keep firing into Lviv or nearby borders of Poland. And for as long as this continues, there will always be a crisis. So the best thing now is to talk about negotiation between Russia and Ukraine, is to create a scenario or create a kind of atmosphere where the two will have to negotiate. It cannot continue this way when you have 100 missiles being sent into a particular country. And don't forget, I can see the Ukrainians now raising an issue of genocide, which is very practical and very possible. For the moment you keep sending 100 missiles and the main target will be the civilian buildings and critical infrastructure like energy grids, then you are creating, it's as if, well, now we cannot achieve our goals because now they are failed in the first objective. The first objective is to annex Ukraine. Now you have declared 4 regions or 4 cities as part of Russia. One is gone already. Kherson is gone. And then so you are left with just maybe even the 3 are still fragile because you don't have total control of Donetsk, you don't have total control of Luhansk, you don't have total control of Zaporizhzhia. So all these things would definitely be, there are things, there are elements that should be addressed, by international bodies, because when you leave a superpower like Russia to continue to battle or to continue to carry out war, acts of aggression against a small country, you are talking of anarchy and hierarchy here. So you are creating a situation and then it is open-ended. It's like a blank check for Russia to keep attacking. I find this very funny. I find it very tragic also that a superpower is fighting a small nation, a very small nation, that is its neighbor. And then the whole world is looking. The United Nations is looking. Irrespective of the status of Russia in the United Nations Security Council, there should still be some institutional mechanisms injected into this kind of war scenario. Because by the time you keep going on like this, about 70% now, it moved from 15% attack on the energy and the infrastructure of Ukraine. Now it is about 70% because about 7 million Ukrainians are cut off from energy. They have no light, nothing. So what is that the target? Is that why should civilians, why should energy infrastructure, why should all these things be your target? They have nothing to do in the war. They have nothing to do in the war.
We want to thank you most sincerely. We've completely run out of time this morning. We'll come back to you in the coming days as this unfolds, when the results of the investigation are out, and then we'll now look again at the ramifications, the full ramifications of what has just happened and the possibilities ahead. Everybody hopes that peace will at some point come to be the dominant theme of this situation. But for now, thank you so much, Professor Thomas, as usual, for your time this morning.
Thank you.
And that's where we wrap up the program this morning. My name is Ladi Akiridunali. Thanks for being with us. There are updates of all our stories throughout the day, but particularly in the world today, so do watch out for that. But for now, do have yourselves a pleasant day ahead. Good morning.